Hi, I'm George Gerbo, and welcome to Washington Times Weekly, where we get a chance to sit down with our reporters and dig into their latest coverage of the news and events around the nation and the world. Joining me today is Washington Times national politics reporter Susan Ferriccio. Susan, good to see you again.
Good to see you, George.
We'll start off with the big budget bill, the big beautiful bill, as President Trump calls it, on Capitol Hill, that's making its way through a myriad of committees. And your recent reporting I liked, honed in on some areas that are pretty relatable to Americans. This campaign promise that President Trump talked about during his 2024 campaign about eliminating taxes on tips and overtime. What's that going to look like in terms of how it makes its way, if it makes its way into this package, and what will it mean for Americans?
Sounds to me like these were priorities of President Trump, so we're probably going to see a huge effort to make sure that those cuts make it through to the end. And so, as you say, it's cuts on taxes on overtime pay, cutting taxes on tips, cutting taxes on auto loan interest payments if your car is made in America. I remember the president has pushed for cars and other manufacturing to take place in America. And also reducing federal taxes on Social Security payments. And the way they would accomplish this is through your ability to claim deductions. I think it's hard for this particular type of bill to pass a law that would eliminate the federal government from taxing you on those things, but then it would allow you to claim them as deductions. So I think the idea is that if you're making $75,000 or less and you're taking Social Security as a senior citizen, that you would be able to claim up to $4,000 in deductions on your taxes, which would be a big savings for a lot of people who are on Social Security. So you wouldn't see it in every check every month, but you would get it at the end. So Democrats are trying to ding the Republicans on this by saying, well, you're not really cutting the taxes. But in the end, you actually are, because when you file your taxes, which we all do every year, you'd be able to claim that as a sizable deduction. So that's one way that Republicans are trying to keep the promises that the president made on the campaign trail. In order to do that, they've had to make cuts too. And that's what we're hearing a lot about on Capitol Hill this week, where you see the plan to save money through reforming Medicaid, which is the nation's fastest growing entitlement program. It's a health care program for the poor. It was initially set up for children and mothers of young children. It was expanded during Obamacare to include adults without children up to age 64. And it never had a work requirement, and it had other loopholes that allowed people who are non-citizens to use the program, and other ways where states could use a formula to get the federal government to pick up more of the tab year upon year. Reforms to that made by House Republicans would save about $880 billion. Now, Democrats are pitching this as big cuts to healthcare that will hurt people who are the neediest. And Republicans are countering by saying, actually, no, we're just putting in work requirements, which are, a part of other entitlement programs in America. And we're blocking illegal immigrants, and we're cleaning up the formula so that the federal government isn't always on the hook for this stuff. So those are some of the reforms and spending that are supposed to pay for these tax cuts. But you're seeing a formula out of the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that showed that this is going to contribute big time to the deficits, the tune of $4 trillion over 10 years. And so what Republicans are saying is that actually there'll be enough economic growth to make up for that. So it's the standard argument about whether or not this will contribute to the deficit or will spur the kind of economic growth that will eliminate the deficit. And that's kind of where the debate lies right now on Capitol Hill.
Moving on to another part of regulation and government that you cover pretty extensively, the clean energy aspect, and how regulations intersect with policies, and how lawmakers can amend those policies. Some of those lawmakers in the Senate want to do that, specifically intruding on California, which has an electric vehicle mandate, or a mandate that all vehicles, passenger cars sold in the state by 2035 be emissions free. So obviously puts the squeeze on a lot of things and makes it harder for certain manufacturers to get into the California market if that were to be the case. And so Senate Republicans, as you've recently written about, want to take action and potentially remove some clauses that were used by California to enact that policy, to go around and allow regular internal combustion vehicles, gas powered vehicles, to continue to be sold in the state.
That's right. They have a limited time to do this because there's special rules that govern this kind of act in Congress. So they only really have until the end of the month to take action on this. And it's interesting because what it would do is roll back a regulation in a state. Well, normally, the Congress is capable of, through some mechanisms, of rolling back federal regulations. This is different because it's applying to the state. And they're trying to do it through by saying that what they're rolling back is an EPA rule that let the state of California put this higher threshold in that's forcing people into EV cars much sooner. And it's a real interesting kind of twist in how they're using the law. Republicans feel quite certain that they can accomplish this, but there's two entities: the Government Accountability Office and also the Senate parliamentarian, who is someone whose recommendations you're not supposed to ignore on Capitol Hill. They're saying, don't do this. You really don't have the power to roll back this rule. So the Senate Republicans are facing this kind of quandary. Do they want to break precedent, which is the thing that pretty much runs the Senate? And then, Democrats will go crazy when they're in power, breaking all kinds of rules. Or do they want to just leave this thing alone? But if they do that, it's really interesting. People think, well, it's the California car market. Well, the California car market is enormous, and because they've got this threshold in here that's trying to force people into EVs, it's influencing the car market in the rest of America. And in addition to that, there are 11 states who are mirroring what California is doing. So it's really bigger than California. It's an effort to get EVs onto the market in much greater numbers, but as we've reported at the Washington Times repeatedly about this issue, those cars sit on lots because consumers don't want them. And they don't want them because they're more expensive and because of the battery range. So it's a real problem. And you see these real conflicting forces right now. There's some Republicans on Capitol Hill who are saying, yes, we are going to roll back this rule. But when you talk to the leadership about, when exactly are you going to vote on this, they're a little more hesitant because they're stuck with this question of precedent in the Senate. So it's a little bit weedy. But, in Washington, in the Senate, breaking the rules is a big deal. So it can have consequences that are unfavorable to the Republican Party if Democrats are in charge. So it's a big issue right now, and I am really wondering whether they're actually going to try to roll this thing back. I know there's a lot of people who want to do it, and I think the automakers are also interested in rolling it back because it would get them off the hook because they're having to produce these cars that no one wants to buy, and what could be possibly be worse for a manufacturer.
Yeah, and finally, kind of continuing on that trend, something the EPA can influence and have action on is the car starters in cars. And if you've bought a new car or car in recent years, a few years ago, the EPA mandated these cutoff switch type of starters, where if you're stopped in traffic or at a red light for a certain period of time, the engine will cut off and then start back up. It's supposed to save fuel economy. The EPA used it then under previous administrations to try to get vehicles to a better MPG standard. And now Administrator Lee Zeldin teasing that this is something they may want to get rid of. A lot of people, it's a conversation I've had recently with people at a car dealership, that vehicles that have this, mechanics are seeing the starters burn out quicker than they normally would, because instead of just turning your car on and turning it off on a trip, it's going on and off multiple times on a drive because it has to cut off when it stops at when the speed gets so low that you're stuck in traffic. And it's been a point of annoyance for a lot of drivers, and it appears the EPA is ready to move and change something about it, Susan.
Right. Well, Lee Zeldin posted a message on social media saying that, the consumers hate it and he's going to get rid of it. And well, how do they do that? You can't tell automakers what to do, but he could change these standards, these fuel economy standards, so that they're not incentivized to put them in. Now, they put them in initially because everybody, the SUV craze that began, many, many years ago, kind of put the car manufacturers in a difficult position because we all know SUVs tend to be more of the gas guzzling type of vehicle. Yet the automakers were under law, especially under Democratic control, were told they had to, increase these fuel economy standards. Well, the EPA created this little area where they could actually, use these on-off switches as sort of to help them meet this standard. And so they, aha, okay, we'll put these in all our cars, and that way, we can keep making all the SUVs. And even though they use more gas, but we'll just have this on and off button. And so now it's in, I think, probably as of 2022, they were in uh, definitely in more than half of all cars. And I'm seeing numbers as high as 75, 80% of all new automobiles have them right now. Now, the car manufacturers will say, we've been improving things. So we've been building the cars so they can withstand the on off. So it's improving, and that it won't affect your battery, your starter, your alternator as much, smoother on off. But, like you say, George, everybody complains about these. Now, you can turn the button off in the car, but it's always on by default every time you start the engine. So you have to always shut it off. And I think, when he did this on Twitter and posted he was going to do something about this, cheers everywhere. People are like, good, I hate it, get rid of it. You probably do save a little money on gas if you keep that thing going all the time. But does that mean you pay for it later when your starter goes? So
Mhm.
it's just one of those things, where the government's constantly trying to squeeze every last little bit out of, like, trying to stop emissions and stop consuming fossil fuels. And this is one of those areas where now the Trump administration is trying to roll it back.
Yeah, seems like there's other areas. 5% is not insignificant, but it feels like there's other areas in the general process that you can find to make vehicles more efficient as
Yeah.
continued new models come out. And it's something we'll be keeping a watch on. Appreciate the time as always, Susan. Thanks.
Thanks, George.
You can check out all of Susan's work at WashingtonTimes.com as well as on social media. I'm George Gerbo. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.